Hello there and welcome back to the channel. Now, let's talk about trust. Trust is a wonderful thing. It's the foundation of any healthy relationship, whether that's with your partner, your dog, or, and this is the big one, your government. We elect these people, we pay their salaries with our taxes, and in return we expect them to, at the very least, not treat the truth like it's a piece of modern art to be twisted into some unrecognizable shape for their own amusement. But what happens when that trust is shattered? When the people in power look you dead in the eye and tell you something that is, to put it mildly, a complete and utter load of bollocks. Well, that's exactly what we're diving into tonight. Today we're counting down the top 10 times your government lied to your face. And I'm not talking about little white lies, like a politician claiming to enjoy kissing babies when we all know they're just sticky loud and frankly a bit gross. No, we're talking about the big ones. The lies that started wars, ruined lives, and fundamentally altered the course of history. These are the whoppers, the fibs, the outright fabrications that should come with their own siren and flashing lights. So buckle up, because this is going to be a bumpy ride through a landscape of deception. From cover-ups to outright fabrications, these are the moments that made us question everything. We're going to pull back the curtain on some of the most audacious deceptions ever perpetrated by those in charge. It's a journey that might make you angry, it will definitely make you think, and it might just make you want to fact-check the next person who tells you the sky is blue. Let's get into it. Kicking off our list at number 10 is a scandal so iconic, it's become the suffix for every political scandal since. If a politician gets caught doing anything dodgy, from taking bribes to, I don't know, illegally importing exotic parakeets, you can bet someone will call it Parakeet Gate. I am, of course, talking about Watergate. The story begins in 1972 with a seemingly third-rate burglary at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate office complex. It seemed minor, almost comical. 5 guys in suits trying to plant bugs. Who does that? It sounds like the plot of a terrible spy movie you'd find in a bargain bin. The Nixon administration's response was swift and dismissive. Press Secretary Ron Ziegler called it a third-rate burglary attempt. President Richard Nixon himself went on television and, with all the sincerity of a crocodile wearing a Hug Me t-shirt, assured the American people that no one in his administration was involved. He said, and I quote, "I can say categorically that no one in the White House staff, no one in this administration, presently employed, was involved in this very bizarre incident." It was a firm, unequivocal denial. He drew a line in the sand and dared anyone to cross it. But here's the thing about lies, especially big, complicated ones. They have a tendency to unravel. Like a cheap sweater, you pull one little thread and soon you're standing there, exposed and shivering. Journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post started pulling that thread, guided by their mysterious source, Deep Throat. They uncovered a trail of slush funds, political espionage, and a concerted effort to sabotage political opponents, all leading directly back to the highest levels of the Nixon administration. This wasn't just a burglary, it was a conspiracy. The denials kept coming, even as the evidence mounted. Tapes were discovered, conversations were revealed, and the phrase executive privilege was stretched to its absolute breaking point. The climax, of course, was Nixon's famous declaration, "I am not a crook," which is, and you have to admire the sheer audacity of it, something only a crook would ever feel the need to say. It's like yelling, "I am not on fire," while actively engulfed in flames. It's not just a lie, it's a performance. Ultimately, the truth came out. The tapes proved Nixon had not only known about the cover-up, but had actively participated in it. He had lied repeatedly to Congress, to the justice system, and to the American people. Facing certain impeachment, he resigned in disgrace, leaving behind a legacy of distrust that poisons the well of American politics to this very day. Watergate taught us a valuable lesson. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up. And also that if you're going to record your criminal conspiracies, maybe don't. Just a thought. Coming in at number 9 is a lie that had, shall we say, slightly more explosive consequences. I'm talking about the case for the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which was built almost entirely on the claim that Saddam Hussein was secretly hoarding a terrifying arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs. The Bush administration painted a chilling picture: a rogue dictator armed with chemical, biological, and even nuclear weapons, ready to unleash hell on the world at a moment's notice. It was a terrifying prospect, designed to scare everyone into submission. The sales pitch was relentless. We had Secretary of State Colin Powell going before the United Nations with satellite photos and diagrams pointing to what he claimed were mobile biological weapons labs. He held up a small vial, meant to represent anthrax, illustrating the potential devastation. He said, "My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence." It was a masterful, compelling performance. The kind of thing that makes you think, well, if that guy says it, it must be true. President George W. Bush warned of a mushroom cloud. Vice President Dick Cheney spoke of no doubt that Saddam had WMDs. The message was uniform, constant, and hammered home with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. They created an atmosphere where questioning the intelligence was seen as unpatriotic, as being soft on terror. If you raised your hand and said, "Excuse me, are we absolutely sure about this?" you were basically branded a stooge for dictators. It was a masterclass in managing public perception. And so, on the basis of these claims, the United States and its allies went to war. Hundreds of thousands of lives were lost, trillions of dollars were spent, and an entire region was destabilized for decades. And after all that, what did we find? Well, to put it bluntly, we found jack squat. No stockpiles of chemical weapons, no biological labs on wheels, no secret nuclear program on the verge of completion. The WMDs, the entire casus belli, were a ghost. They simply weren't there. Years later, the official reports concluded that the intelligence was in fact flawed, misrepresented, and in some cases outright fabricated. Colin Powell would later call his UN speech a blot on his record. But the damage was done. A war was started on a false premise, a lie that was sold to the world with absolute certainty. It serves as a horrifying reminder of how easily intelligence can be fixed to fit a policy, and how catastrophic the consequences can be when we go to war chasing phantoms. At number 8, we have a story that is not just a lie, but a profound and monstrous betrayal of trust, ethics, and basic human decency. This is the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. It's a name that should send a chill down your spine, because what it represents is the U.S. government, specifically the Public Health Service, conducting a 40-year experiment on hundreds of poor African-American men who were told they were receiving free healthcare for bad blood. The study began in 1932 in Macon County, Alabama. The researchers recruited 600 sharecroppers, 399 who had syphilis and 201 who did not. The men were promised free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance for participating. What they were not told was the true purpose of the study: to observe the natural, untreated progression of syphilis until death. They weren't being treated, they were being watched. They were lab rats in a cruel, long-term observation. The deception was systematic and insidious. The men were given placebos, ineffective ointments, and diagnostic procedures that were passed off as treatments. The doctors involved knew exactly what they were doing. They were meticulously documenting the disease's brutal effects: the blindness, the insanity, the heart disease, the organ failure, and ultimately, the death. They were watching human beings suffer and decay, and they called it science. The most unforgivable part of this lie came in the 1940s when penicillin became the standard, effective cure for syphilis. Did the researchers stop the study and give these men the life-saving treatment? Of course not. That would have ruined their precious data. Instead, they actively prevented the men from getting treatment. They conspired with the military to ensure the men wouldn't be treated after being drafted for World War II. They lied to them year after year, decade after decade, as their bodies were ravaged by a curable disease. It wasn't until 1972, a full 40 years after it began, that the truth was exposed by an Associated Press reporter named Jean Heller. The public outcry was immense and immediate. The study was finally terminated, but by then it was too late for many. Dozens had died from syphilis, wives had been infected, and children had been born with the congenital form of the disease. The Tuskegee study is a grotesque stain on American history, a lie that demonstrates the terrifying potential for abuse when the powerful see the powerless not as people but as subjects. Moving on to number 7, a lie that brings us firmly into the 21st century and, honestly, confirms the worst fears of every paranoid person who puts tape over their laptop camera. And frankly, after this, you might want to consider it. I'm talking about the NSA's mass surveillance programs. For years, Americans had this vague, uneasy feeling that someone somewhere might be listening in, but top government officials were always there to pat us on the head and say, there, silly citizen, we would never do that without a warrant. The most famous denial came in March 2013. During a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing, Senator Ron Wyden asked the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, a very direct question. Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans? Clapper's response under oath was equally direct. No, sir. He followed up with, not wittingly. It was a flat, unambiguous denial from the highest-ranking intelligence official in the country. The message was clear. Your privacy is safe with us. Well, that denial had a shelf life of about 3 months, because in June 2013, a contractor named Edward Snowden decided to do a bit of redecorating, specifically by papering the world's newspapers with top-secret NSA documents. These leaks revealed the stunning truth. The NSA was, in fact, collecting vast amounts of data on millions of Americans. They were scooping up phone records, who you called, when you called them, how long you talked, from Verizon and other carriers. This was the PRISM program, a secret court order, a massive dragnet. The Snowden revelations were a bombshell. They proved that the U.S. government was engaged in domestic surveillance on a scale that was previously unimaginable. They were not just targeting suspected terrorists, they were collecting information on everyone, just in case. The not wittingly part of Clapper's denial turned out to be a piece of weaselly linguistic gymnastics. They argued they weren't collecting the content of the calls, just the metadata, which is like saying you didn't read someone's diary, you just recorded who they wrote about and for how long on every single page. It's a meaningless distinction. In the aftermath, James Clapper would later admit his testimony was the least untruthful statement he could make, which is a truly remarkable phrase. It's like saying something is the least flammable pile of oily rags. The lie wasn't just misleading. It was a deliberate deception of Congress and the American public about a program that fundamentally altered the relationship between the citizen and the state. It proved that when it comes to privacy, the government's promises are sometimes worth less than the paper they're printed on. All right, at number 6, we have a scandal so convoluted it makes quantum physics look like a recipe for toast. This is the Iran-Contra affair, a Reagan-era saga of secret deals, illegal funding, and a whole lot of lying. It's a story that involves selling weapons to your sworn enemy to free hostages, and then using the profits to illegally fund anti-communist rebels in Central America. If you pitch this as a movie, a studio head would tell you it's just too unrealistic. The official U.S. policy in the 1980s was crystal clear. We do not negotiate with terrorists, and we do not sell arms to Iran, a country we considered a state sponsor of terrorism. President Ronald Reagan himself was very firm on this. In 1985, he said, "The United States gives no quarter to terrorists. We make no concessions. We make no deals." A strong, principled stance. Except behind the scenes, his administration was doing exactly that. They were secretly selling missiles to Iran in the hopes that Iran would use its influence to help free American hostages being held in Lebanon. So that's one massive lie right there. But wait, there's more. The plan had a secret, even more illegal second act. The money from these secret arms sales wasn't just going into the U.S. Treasury. A charismatic National Security Council staffer named Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North had a brilliant idea. Let's divert the profits from the Iran arms sales and funnel them to the Contras, a right-wing rebel group trying to overthrow the socialist government of Nicaragua. There was just one tiny problem with this plan. It was super illegal. Congress had explicitly forbidden funding the Contras through a series of laws known as the Boland Amendment. So the Reagan administration was not only violating its own stated policy on Iran, but it was also breaking U.S. law to fund a proxy war in Central America. This was a secret foreign policy being run out of the White House basement, completely outside the bounds of the law and public knowledge. When the story eventually broke in late 1986, the denials came thick and fast. Reagan went on TV and stated flatly, "We did not, repeat, did not, trade weapons or anything else for hostages." Oliver North and his colleagues shredded so many documents they probably broke the office shredder. But the truth, as it often does, seeped out. During televised congressional hearings, North, in his crisp uniform, admitted to the scheme, framing it as a patriotic endeavor. Reagan was eventually forced to admit that arms had, in fact, been traded for hostages. The whole affair was a masterclass in government deception, a shadow operation that made a mockery of public policy and the rule of law. At the halfway point, number 5, we have a lie that served as the formal entry ticket for the United States into one of its longest and most divisive wars. I'm talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the event that led to the Vietnam War, escalating from a "we're just advising" situation to a full-blown military conflict. The story the American public was told in August 1964 was simple and alarming. North Vietnamese patrol boats had launched an unprovoked attack on U.S. warships in international waters. The official narrative, pushed by President Lyndon B. Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, described 2 separate attacks. The first, on August 2nd on the USS Maddox, was portrayed as a clear act of aggression. The second, a supposed attack on both the Maddox and the USS Turner Joy on August 4th, was presented as definitive proof of North Vietnam's hostile intent. Johnson went on national television with a grim face, speaking of repeated acts of violence against the armed forces of the United States that required a military response. Armed with this narrative of unprovoked aggression, the Johnson administration rushed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution through Congress. It passed almost unanimously, giving the president sweeping authority to use military force in Southeast Asia without a formal declaration of war. It was, essentially, a blank check to wage war, and Johnson cashed it immediately, launching retaliatory airstrikes and soon after, sending hundreds of thousands of American troops to Vietnam. Here's the problem. The story was, at best, a gross distortion and, at worst, a complete fabrication. While the first incident on August 2nd did happen, it was hardly unprovoked. The USS Maddox was on an intelligence-gathering mission deep in what North Vietnam considered its territorial waters, supporting South Vietnamese commando raids. The North Vietnamese boats fired, the Maddox fired back, and it was a skirmish. But the second attack on August 4th, it almost certainly never happened. Years later, declassified documents, including communications from the ship's commanders and internal NSA reports, revealed the truth. The crew on the ships were spooked, dealing with bad weather and faulty sonar readings. The enemy torpedoes were likely just sonar pings from their own ship's rudder. One pilot flying overhead radioed, "I have the entire Gulf in view. There are no boats out there." But back in Washington, officials were desperate for a reason to escalate, and they chose to believe the most aggressive interpretation of the confusing reports, ignoring evidence to the contrary. They lied by omission and exaggeration, and that lie led to a war that cost millions of lives. For our number 4 spot, we delve into a secret war waged not against a foreign enemy, but against American citizens. This was COINTELPRO, or the Counterintelligence Program, a series of covert and often illegal projects conducted by the FBI between 1956 and 1971. Its stated goal was to protect national security, but its real purpose was to surveil, discredit, and disrupt domestic political organizations that the FBI, under the iron fist of J. Edgar Hoover, deemed subversive. For years, this program operated in total secrecy. If you were a member of a civil rights group, an anti-war movement, or a feminist organization in the 1960s and felt like you were being watched, you weren't paranoid, you were probably right. The FBI was engaged in a campaign of dirty tricks that would make a Machiavellian prince blush. They planted spies in political groups, bugged homes and offices, and conducted illegal break-ins to gather information. But they didn't just watch. The disrupt part of their mission was where things got truly sinister. The FBI forged documents and sent fake letters to create infighting and paranoia within groups. They spread false rumors to the media to discredit leaders. They used psychological warfare to harass activists, sometimes with tragic consequences. For example, they sent an anonymous letter to Martin Luther King Jr., threatening to expose his extramarital affairs and suggesting he commit suicide. This wasn't law enforcement. This was a state-sanctioned vendetta. The targets of COINTELPRO were incredibly broad. It started with the Communist Party, but quickly expanded to include everyone from the Black Panther Party and the Socialist Workers' Party to student anti-war protesters and even women's liberation groups. Essentially, if J. Edgar Hoover didn't like your politics, you could end up with a target on your back. The government was secretly fighting a war against dissent, using the nation's top law enforcement agency as its personal secret police. The program remained a closely guarded secret until 1971, when a group of activists calling themselves the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and stole over 1,000 documents. They leaked these documents to the press, and for the first time, the public saw the name COINTELPRO and learned the shocking truth about the FBI's activities. The subsequent congressional investigation, the Church Committee, confirmed the program's abuses and led to reforms intended to curb the FBI's power. It was a stunning revelation that the government had lied not just with words, but with a decade and a half of secret illegal actions against its own people. Our number 3 lie is, honestly, a modern tragedy that shows how government deception can have immediate poisonous consequences for the people it's supposed to protect. I'm talking about the Flint water crisis. This wasn't a lie about war or spies. It was a lie about the most basic necessity of life, the water coming out of the tap. And the people who told this lie, repeatedly, were the very officials tasked with ensuring that water was safe. The crisis began in 2014 when the city of Flint, Michigan, in a cost-cutting move overseen by a state-appointed emergency manager, switched its water source from Detroit's system to the Flint River. The Flint River water was known to be highly corrosive, but crucially, officials failed to apply corrosion control treatment, which is a basic, legally required step. This was like deciding to save money on your car by not putting oil in the engine. The result was predictable and catastrophic. The corrosive water began eating away at the city's aging lead pipes, leaching toxic lead into the drinking water. Residents immediately noticed problems. The water was discolored, it smelled foul, and it tasted terrible. People started developing rashes, hair loss, and other health problems. They complained, they brought jugs of brown water to city meetings, they pleaded for help. And what did the government officials tell them? They told them not to worry. The denials were persistent and honestly, infuriating. Representatives from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality insisted the water was safe and met federal standards. The governor's office downplayed the concerns. At one point, after a local hospital found elevated lead levels in children's blood, a state spokesman accused the doctor of causing near hysteria. They were, in effect, gaslighting an entire city, telling them that the brown, smelly poison coming from their faucets was perfectly fine and that they were crazy for thinking otherwise. The truth was eventually forced into the open by the tireless work of local activists, independent scientists from Virginia Tech, and a heroic local pediatrician, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha. Their tests proved what residents knew all along. The water was contaminated with dangerous levels of lead. The lies unraveled, leading to criminal charges against several government officials and a public health disaster. The Flint water crisis is a horrifying example of how bureaucratic arrogance and a desire to save a few bucks can lead officials to lie directly to the public's face, even as they are being poisoned. At number 2, we have a lie that is so vast it spanned 4 different presidential administrations. It's the lie at the heart of the Vietnam War itself, exposed to the world by a bombshell leak known as the Pentagon Papers. While the Gulf of Tonkin lie got America into the war, the lies revealed by the Pentagon Papers showed that the government knew the war was unwinnable for years, yet continued to send young men to die while telling the public that victory was just around the corner. In 1967, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, a man who had become deeply disillusioned with the war he helped architect, commissioned a top-secret study of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The result was a 7,000-page document officially titled Report of the Office of the Secretary of Defense Vietnam Task Force. It was a comprehensive, brutally honest internal history of the war, and it painted a devastating picture of government deception. The papers revealed that the U.S. had secretly expanded the war, conducting bombing raids in Cambodia and Laos and coastal raids on North Vietnam, all of which were kept secret from the American public. They showed that from the very beginning, the government's primary motivation was not to help the South Vietnamese or to stop communism, but to avoid a humiliating U.S. defeat. It was about saving face, not saving lives. Most damningly, the study showed a huge gap between the government's private assessments and its public statements. While presidents from Truman to Johnson were privately acknowledging the grim reality and the slim chances of success, they were publicly projecting an image of optimism and progress. They spoke of light at the end of the tunnel, while their own reports told them the tunnel was collapsing. This wasn't just spin. It was a deliberate, long-term campaign to mislead the American people about a war that was costing thousands of lives and tearing the country apart. In 1971, a military analyst named Daniel Ellsberg, who had worked on the study, decided the public had a right to know. He leaked the Pentagon papers to the New York Times and the Washington Post. The Nixon administration tried to block their publication, citing national security, in a legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. The court sided with the press, and the truth came out. The Pentagon papers proved that the government had not only lied about the war's origins, but about its entire conduct and purpose, revealing a deep-seated contempt for the truth and for the public they were supposed to serve. And here we are, at number 1, the top of our mountain of mendacity. This one is a little different. It's not a lie told directly to the public, but a leaked memo that revealed the to lie. It's the smoking gun that showed how the justification for the Iraq War was being engineered long before the public was brought on board. I'm talking about the Downing Street memo. While our number 9 entry focused on the WMD lie itself, this reveals the cynical premeditation behind it. The memo is the official record of a meeting of top British security officials held on July 23, 2002, a full 8 months before the invasion of Iraq. The meeting included Prime Minister Tony Blair and Sir Richard Dearlove, the head of MI6, who had just returned from a trip to Washington. The memo contains minutes of this meeting, and one sentence in particular is absolutely chilling. It's a summary of Dearlove's report on the Bush administration's mindset. The memo states, and I quote, "Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action, justified by the conjunction of terrorism and WMD. But the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy." Let me just repeat that last part. The intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy. This wasn't a case of faulty intelligence leading to a bad decision. This was a case of a decision having already been made, to go to war, and the intelligence community being tasked with finding a justification for it. The conclusion came first. The evidence was to be manufactured later. This memo, leaked to the Sunday Times of London in 2005, was dynamite. It suggested that the entire public debate in the lead-up to the war, the UN inspections, the presentations about WMDs, was all just political theater. The decision was already a done deal. The Bush administration and its key ally, the Blair government, were not weighing the evidence. They were building a case. They were working backwards from the answer they wanted. When the memo was leaked, the White House and Downing Street dismissed it as old news or claimed it was being misinterpreted. But it's hard to misinterpret a sentence as clear as the facts were being fixed. It confirmed the worst suspicions of war critics, that the public, Congress, and the world had been sold a war on a deliberately manipulated premise. It wasn't just a lie, it was the blueprint for a lie. It was a peek behind the curtain showing how the sausage of war is made, and it turns out it's made with a whole lot of rotten ingredients. For its sheer, cold-blooded cynicism, the Downing Street memo is our number 1 government lie. So there you have it, 10 instances where the truth was not just a casualty, but a deliberate target. From secret wars and illegal surveillance to poisoned water and non-existent weapons, the capacity for governments to deceive is frankly staggering. And these are just the ones we know about. It's a sobering list that demonstrates a pattern of behavior that spans decades, political parties, and continents. The common thread is a fundamental disrespect for the public, a belief that we, the people, either can't handle the truth or don't deserve it. These are just a few examples of when the truth was bent, twisted, or hidden from the public. It's easy to feel cynical or powerless in the face of such deception. But despair is not a strategy. The lesson here isn't to retreat into a bunker of paranoia, but to recognize the immense importance of skepticism, journalism, and whistleblowers. The truth in many of these stories only came out because someone, somewhere, had the courage to ask a tough question, file a report, or leak a document. Accountability is not given, it is demanded. So what can we do? We can do our part. Stay informed, ask questions, and never stop seeking the truth. Support independent journalism, read widely, question official narratives, especially when they seem too simple or are designed to make you afraid. Demand transparency and hold elected officials accountable for their words and actions. Because a government that is not afraid of its citizens will have no problem lying to them. And the best defense against a lie is a public that is determined to find the truth. Thanks for watching.